Landing on My Heart, Chapter 34. How did you start playing with your phone? Jing Yuan looked at Cecile Ruan with teary eyes. Can you respect me? I'll send a message back. Cecile Ruan was sleepy, hungry, and tired, resisting the urge to hit hatchet, got up and said, I'll go to the bathroom. Why do you always go to the bathroom? Jing Yuan frowned in dissatisfaction, and continued to cry on her stomach. Cecile Ruan hid in the bathroom with her phone and messaged Louis Fu. Cecile Ruan, are you here? Louis Fu. Cecile Ruan, hurry up. Louis Fu, don't worry, there are still a few minutes. After urging, Cecile Ruan went to the bathroom, but within a few minutes, someone outside took the opportunity to enter. All in Jinjiang Literature City, she watched from a distance and saw a man in a floral shirt and leggings leaning over in front of Jing Yuan with a glass of wine. Beauty, drinking alone. Jing Yuan raised her head, the tears on her face were not dry, and she looked pitiful. The man's heart itched all of a sudden, and very naturally sat next to her, leaned into her ear and said, ouch, why is the beauty crying? Jing Yuan, who has been protected since she was a child, has never encountered this situation, her brain has not turned, and she looks at the man opposite her stunned, and her shirt sways her dazzled. The flower shirt had no resistance to the beautiful woman who showed such an expression, and reached out to put his arm around her. However, before he touched Jing Yuan's shoulder, he was grabbed by the arm. What are you doing? The flower shirt turned around and saw Cecile Ruan looking at her coldly. Hey, today there is Yan Fu, and another big beauty. I'm comforting the little beauty. The flower shirt smiled and withdrew his arm, his gaze glued to Cecile Ruan's face. You guys together. Cecile Ruan didn't want to cause trouble in Bianxian's shop, so she tried not to do anything if she could, so she said calmly, well, is there something wrong with you here? If it's okay, she and I are leaving. Don't worry, it's only time, let's have 2 drinks. The flower shirt said and leaned towards Jing Yuan. Why is the beauty crying? Lost in love. Talk to your brother, and your brother will unravel you. Cecile Ruan sat down on the couch opposite, folded her arms, and said, I tell you why. She broke the leg of a man who picked her up today, was afraid of going to jail, and cried with fear. Jing Yuan. The smile on the lips of the flower shirt froze, and after a few seconds, he laughed dryly. Hee hee, beautiful women really joke. I'm not kidding you. Cecile Ruan moved her hands. I have a lot of experience in this area, so she came to me with ideas. After speaking, she tilted her head to look at the flower shirt. You also come up with an idea together. If you can't hear Ruan Si's meaning, you would be stupid. The flower shirt gritted her teeth, picked up the wine glass and left, and whispered, what a thorny rose. Cecile Ruan just didn't hear his earthy adjective and handed a tissue to Jing Yuan. Wipe, eyeliner is spent. Jing Yuan took the tissue, but covered her mouth and vomited. Cecile Ruan jumped up all of a sudden. Isn't it, you vomited when you ordered such a drink? I thought you drank well. The vomit gushed in the throat. Jing Yuan stood up and rushed to the toilet, not forgetting to explain, I was vomited by that man's nausea. Cecile Ruan strode after her, but was shut out of the door. Jing Yuan didn't want others to see her vomiting. How shameful. The first thing after entering was to turn on the faucet to cover up the sound of vomiting. Cecile Ruan knocked on the door. Are you okay? I'm fine, just spit for a while. In this case, Cecile Ruan did not bother to add congestion to this cramped bathroom. It was at this time that Louis Fu arrived. He pushed the door in, looked around, didn't see Cecile Ruan, and walked to the bar. Bianxian, who was wiping the cup, looked up and saw him. His eyes lit up, and soon he felt familiar again. She tilted her head and looked carefully, and suddenly realized. Louis Fu suddenly appeared here, and Bianxian was not naive enough to think that he was here to drink. What else could he do except pick up Cecile Ruan? President Fu. Louis Fu stopped right in front of the bar. You know me. That's unknowable. Bianxian laughed mockingly. You don't know me, but I know you well. Just when Louis Fu was wondering, Cecile Ruan walked over with a black face and stared at Bianxian with death. Are you okay? Bianxian immediately held back a smile and pretended to shake the cup. I'll go greet the guests. After that, he walked away, leaving only Louis Fu and Cecile Ruan at the bar. He pondered Bianxian's words, probably what he thought. So does Cecile Ruan often mention him in front of friends? He was in a better mood, looking down at her with a smile in his eyes. Drinking? Nope, Cecile Ruan sniffed. Did you drink? Louis Fu nodded. Well, there's an entertainment tonight. Cecile Ruan heard this and asked, so you came halfway? If this is the case, she is still a little embarrassed to delay Louis Fu's business. After all, it is good for Heng to be good to her. No, I'm already home, what's the matter with me? Oh, Jing Yuan is spitting in it. Louis Fu paused. Jing Yuan. Yes, Cecile Ruan said, she's drinking because you're here, and if you don't get her away, I don't want to go home to sleep tonight. After a short silence, Louis Fu's expression became a little cold. It was because Jing Yuan called him over. After drinking a lot of wine at night, when the driver asked him where to go back, he subconsciously chose the famous minister apartment farther away than the Huguang mansion. The reason was simple, he suddenly wanted to meet Cecile Ruan. Just like the countless inexplicable thoughts that have popped up recently, there is no reason, just suddenly want to meet her. Although he knew that she would not have a good face for herself, he didn't feel anything, and even thought that he was quite funny when he lost his temper sometimes. As for why you can't type, because you can't see people, it's good to hear the voice. Louis Fu had such a simple idea. So when she said if you can't do it, forget it, Louis Fu's face instantly darkened. Fortunately, the next second, she resent another "you come to me now." While sitting in the car, Louis Fu looked at the neon lights outside the car window, with a faint smile on the corner of his mouth. She really wanted to see me. And it's also a bar place. After drinking, the person I want to see is me. All in Xinjiang Literature City, but when the people got here, Louis Fu realized that it didn't seem to be like this for a while. He tilted his head and asked, "What's wrong with her?" Cecile Ruan did not notice the change in Louis Fu's expression, and said with a bit of ridicule, "You go and apologize for your own angry crying woman, I won't help, I'm going home to sleep." Of course, Louis Fu knows how he cried Jing Yuan, but he doesn't want to deal with this matter at all now. It turned out that Cecile Ruan hurriedly called him over, not to see him, but just to let him clean up Jing Yuan's mess, and his tone was so irrelevant, as if he was a completely irrelevant person, and did not care how he was with other women, and even deliberately pushed her to other women. Suddenly, I feel as if I am bored with myself. I have more women crying angrily, I want to find something for me, do I have to apologize? After saying this, he suddenly realized that something was wrong. When he looked at Cecile Ruan, he saw that her face changed. Louis Fu frowned, regretting in his heart, so he softened his tone, "I didn't mean that." Cecile Ruan glared at him, "There is no apology in Mr. Fu's dictionary, right?" Louis Fu admits that Cecile Ruan is partly right. Since he became an adult, he has rarely made mistakes, and due to his status, apologies are even rarer. However, in the months after thinking about Cecile Ruan, he thought about apologizing several times, but every time he saw Cecile Ruan squinting at him, it was difficult for him to open that mouth. Only now does Louis Fu know that it is still a thorn in her heart, and if she does not open up, it will be her eternal knot. "I apologize to you now." He spoke suddenly, hardly thinking about it. All in Xinjiang Literature City. Cecile Ruan didn't react for a moment, only to see his head hanging slightly, looking into his eyes, as if conveying something. "I misunderstood you before, it's me who is sorry for you." "You," Cecile Ruan was a little incredulous, "you remembered." He continued, "Can you forgive me? If not, if you ask, I will agree to you if I can." Cecile Ruan froze in place, a little overwhelmed. She had fantasized countless times that Louis Fu, a dog man, would apologize in a low voice in front of her, and then turn around and walk away in a dashing manner. But when it really came to this day, his mood seemed to be different from what he imagined, and he didn't have the feeling of revenge. Thinking about it carefully, it seems that it is because she has not recalled the previous events for a long time. But every time she saw Louis Fu recently, she would still go against him and him, but she knew very well that she was never angry because of what happened before. It seems to be a subconscious childish behavior, like a schoolboy. "Don't you stop talking." Louis Fu's voice sounded in her ears, "What do you want me to do to relieve my qi?" As soon as he spoke, Cecile Ruan's heart became even more confused. Because she feels that she has not been angry for a long time, it is very faceless to say this. Just at this time, Jing Yuan came out of the bathroom. Cecile Ruan frowned and said, "You send Jing Yuan back first, she drank too much and vomited in the toilet." Louis Fu's heart was heavy, sighed, and turned to walk towards Jing Yuan. When she pulled Jing Yuan to the car door and shoved it in, she still struggled hard. "Oops, don't move me. I can go back by myself and my driver will pick me up." She didn't go in, and Louis Fu couldn't move her, so he could only say in a deep voice, "You can be safe, don't make a mess for me." "Who messed with you?" "Louis Fu, I tell you, I have never suffered this grievance since I was a child." Her arm slashed in front of Louis Fu. "I, Jing Yuan, will break off from you from now on, you take your Yangguan road, and I will cross my One Wood Bridge." No, you take the Onewood Bridge, I will cross the Yongguan Road, in short. We are not related to each other in the future. Louis Fu was irritable and didn't want to talk to the drunk anymore, so he asked the driver to come and settle her. Send her back, tell me when it's safe to get home, don't let her down on the road. Don't pretend you care about my appearance. I tell you, I know you don't like me at all. Do you think I like you very much? Do you think the whole world likes you? You think too much. So many people don't like you. The phrase "so many people don't like you" was like a needle that suddenly pierced Louis Fu's heart. Louis Fu didn't take care of Jing Yuan anymore and turned back directly. Meanwhile, Cecile Ruan sat on the edge of the bar, propped her chin in a daze. At this time, the flower shirt just now didn't know where to buy a rose, and he was caught off guard and handed it to Cecile Ruan. "Beauty, is my friend gone?" Sitting alone at the bar. Cecile Ruan didn't even look at him, and said coldly, "Go away, don't bother me." After that, she picked up the orange juice in front of her and wanted to take a sip, but the flower shirt suddenly took away her cup, grinned with yellow teeth and smiled. "If you are upset, you have to drink even more. How about I invite you to drink the signature Sunset Boulevard here?" Cecile Ruan took a deep breath and turned to look at him. The flower shirt sat down on another bar stool, caught a glimpse of Cecile Ruan's white and slender fingers, itched for a moment, and reached out to touch it. "I can't see the beauty worried. Come, we have 1,000 glasses of wine to our confidant, let's make a toast first." Looking down at the fat hand she placed on the back of her hand, and kept rubbing it, the bottom line of anger in Cecile Ruan's heart was on the verge of collapse. "I warn you one last time, I don't want to cause trouble to my friends, but if you harass me again, I'm welcome." She withdrew her hand, glanced at the beer belly of the flower shirt, and sneered, "If you really want to do it, you are definitely not my opponent, believe it or not." The flower shirt naturally didn't believe what a woman could do to him, and smiled and put his arm around her shoulder. "Oh. Is it? Want to get your hands dirty? Where are you going?" Just as Bian Xian also came over, seeing this scene, he immediately said with a cold face, "Sir, please be respectful, otherwise I will call the police." In the end, the flower shirt was threatened away by Bian Xian with a black face. Cecile Ruan turned around again and continued to prop her chin in a daze. "What's wrong?" Seeing that Louis Fu was gone, Bian Xian asked. "He's gone. Well, let him send Xing Yuan home. Let him send the other woman home, you really have a big heart." Cecile Ruan sighed, and was about to refute Bian Xian, when suddenly a hand reached over and patted her shoulder again. "Are you bothered?" After speaking, the person behind still had no intention of leaving, and the hand on her shoulder was released, but he grabbed her wrist again. Cecile Ruan couldn't bear it at all, thinking that my 50-kilogram arm pushed white. Did I do pull-ups white? If you don't teach you to be human, you don't know that not any woman you can harass. She charged for a second, turned around and slapped it over. A pop sounded throughout the bar. The cup in Bian Xian's hand instantly fell to the ground, and he was stunned to see the scene in front of him. And Cecile Ruan was stunned in place, half open his mouth, his palm was still hot and painful, and the burning feeling was not dissipated for a long time. Cecile Ruan's whole body was stunned, his brain was buzzing, and he forgot to blink. Louis Fu pursed his lips, his dark eyes fixed on Cecile Ruan. A red palm print slowly appeared from his fair cheeks to his jawline. "Are you relieved?" Landing on my heart. Chapter 35. Cecile Ruan's raised hand was still frozen in the air, and his mind did not return to his senses for a long time, haunted by chaotic emotions. There was shock, there was horror, there was guilt, and there was a hint of distressed. The slap sound said that it was not big, but it attracted the surrounding guests, who turned their heads and looked over. And then one after another, almost all the guests in the bar looked over, exchanged ears, and the interest in eating melons was very strong. Bian Xian came back to his senses from this great change, and he happened to have ice cubes at hand, and immediately took a rag wrapped and rushed out very quickly to hand it to Cecile Ruan. All in Xinjiang Literature City. Cecile Ruan's heart was still pounding, and when she saw Bian Xian's movements, she didn't think much about it, and raised her hand to help Louis Fu put her cheek on it. But he tilted his head, dodged the ice, and looked straight at Cecile Ruan. "Are you relieved?" When Louis Fu asked this for the second time, Cecile Ruan's explanation, which had already reached his throat, was suppressed again. She touched the tip of her tongue against her chin, was silent for a moment, and nodded. "Well, relieved. Okay, we're clear." Louis Fu didn't have any extra words, not even extra eyes, and directly turned around and walked out. Bian Xian didn't understand this direction too well. "No, why didn't you explain it to him just now?" You didn't want to hit him, it was a misunderstanding. What are you doing? He's your boss. With Bien Xian's nagging in his ears, Cecile Ruan was still looking at Louis Fu's back. It wasn't until he closed the door that Cecile Ruan said, I explained to him that I hit the wrong person, that I didn't mean to hit him, and then what? It's not over for the two of us. Bien Xian nodded understandingly, then you admit it, even if this matter is completely over. Yes, Cecile Ruan also realized at this time that Louis Fu suddenly changed his attitude towards her before, and he should have known about it. It's just that this person is proud of himself, and Su never thought of apologizing to her. But these days, his connivance with her is actually a special apology. And she found that she didn't seem to be angry anymore, but there didn't seem to be a clear point in this matter, and instead of being entangled in this, it was better to let this slap be used as an opportunity to completely turn over the previous things. Anyway, I'm here in the past. Bien Xian didn't understand what she meant after thinking for a long time, glanced at the time, and waved to hurry up. Forget it, you hurry back to rest, there will be no flights tomorrow. Cecile Ruan was indeed tired and picked up her bag and prepared to go home. All in Xinjiang Literature City, however, as soon as she opened the door, she saw Louis Fu still standing on the side of the road. Louis Fu's driver sent Xing Yuan home, and at night, he didn't bother to call someone to pick him up. He looked up at the traffic in the distance, and Cecile Ruan's angle happened to be able to see the shadowy light, and the slap print on his face was very conspicuous. Is my slap so powerful? The waiting intersection was just one pass, and Cecile Ruan had to stand there. Feeling that there was another person next to him, Louis Fu glanced back, and the two looked at each other, but they didn't seem to know what to say, so they tacitly looked away. An embarrassment suddenly completely enveloped the two. The summer night was thick and the evening breeze was scorching, so after standing in the open air for a while, Cecile Ruan felt that her body had begun to sweat. Fortunately, I finally waited for a taxi. The driver stopped the car in front of the two and asked, "Take a taxi." Louis Fu turned his head and said, "You first." "Cecile Ruan, you go first." As she spoke, her eyes still glanced at Louis Fu's face. "Louis Fu, don't start, don't show her. You first, I can wait." One slapped, the other slapped, and it is quite magical to be humble here. After two back and forth, Louis Fu nodded flatly, pulled the car door and got into the car. "Go to the Mingchen apartment." The driver said yes, but asked outside, "Beauty, where are you going? Isn't Mingchen apartment on the way?" Cecile Ruan, Louis Fu probably didn't want to see her at this time, so he shook his head and said, "You go first, I'll wait for the car." The driver said oh and was about to step on the accelerator, but Louis Fu looked through the window. After looking at it twice, he spoke, "Let's go together." His voice was soft, almost breathless, and tinged with a sense of exhaustion, which Cecile Ruan almost listened to lip sync. Good, there was no word all the way, until I returned to the apartment and entered the elevator. The two did not communicate much, and the confined space was more embarrassing than in the taxi. It's just that when they stand side by side facing the elevator door, Cecile Ruan accidentally sees Louis Fu's face in the mirror. Isn't this person's skin too white, and the five-finger mountain is so impressive? Back home, Cecile Ruan was tired and hungry, took off her shoes and went to the bathroom. Just as she was about to undress and take a shower, she caught a glimpse of a bottle of essence on the sink. It is the essence she has always liked to use, and it is aimed at skin repair, and the function is obvious. After thinking about it, she walked out with this bottle of essence, and when she passed the kitchen, she also carried a bucket of ice cubes by the way. But when she stood outside the elevator door, she remembered that when she entered the elevator, she saw him press the 16th floor, but she didn't know exactly where he lived. She messaged Louis Fu directly. "Cecile Ruan, what number do you live in?" After waiting for a few minutes, he did not reply to the message. Cecile Ruan asked Bergen again and quickly got an answer. 2 minutes later, she rang the doorbell for 1601. It was quiet in the hallway, and Cecile Ruan looked down at his toes, thinking of the five-finger mountain on Louis Fu's face. What a proud person he was. She probably wouldn't open the door when he saw it on the monitor. As soon as the idea took shape, the door in front of me clicked open. Louis Fu had changed into loose clothes, stood in the doorway, looked at what was in Cecile Ruan's hand, and when his eyes returned to her face again, there were some indescribable complex emotions in his eyes. "Come to see me this wounded." Cecile Ruan did not deny it, and directly handed him the thing. "You put it on, tomorrow will be much better." The ice cube was settled, and Louis Fu looked at his other hand. What is this? Repair essence, it works very well. Louis Fu tugged at the corners of her mouth, took the ice bucket in her hand, and said lightly, I don't need that. Then he turned around and went back to the house, and before the door was closed, Cecile Ruan followed him inside and said, it's really effective, I'll test it myself. Louis Fu paused in his steps, looked back at her, and frowned. You are often beaten by people. Cecile Ruan. No, we used to have some routes with severe high-altitude radiation, and my face would turn red. Louis Fu directly put the ice bucket on the coffee table and sat down on the sofa, leaning loosely against the soft pillow, with no expression on his face. Then you wipe it for me. Cecile Ruan was only briefly startled, then walked directly to the sofa and sat down next to Louis Fu. And Louis Fu saw her come over so calmly, but it was a little unnatural. He pursed his lips and looked away. Cecile Ruan took care of himself and scooped out the thick liquid in the palm of his hand, dipped it with the index finger of the other hand, and gently wiped it on his face. Just when his fingertips touched his skin, Cecile Ruan's movements paused for a moment. Such an obvious palm print, it may not be completely eliminated for a while and a half. He is a director, how to see people tomorrow. Sensing her strangeness, Louis Fu turned to look at her and narrowed his eyes. What? Distressed. What's going on with this man? Nope, Cecile Ruan immediately said, I was just thinking, I'm not a broken palm, how can I have so much strength? Louis Fu snorted softly in his nose. Cecile Ruan lifted up a little serum, little by little, everywhere, carefully smeared the side of his face. The sound of insects in the summer night rose and fell, and a sound passed through the window, accompanied by Louis Fu's breathing, into Cecile Ruan's ears. She pushed so hard that it seemed to tickle, and Louis Fu endured it for a few minutes, but he couldn't help it, frowning. Am I pushing too hard? Louis Fu muttered for a moment. No, you continue. Cecile Ruan let out an "oh" and started lighter. Louis Fu's brows never relaxed, and even his breathing gradually became sharper. Seeing this, Cecile Ruan's movements were light again. Finally, Louis Fu couldn't bear it anymore and said, Are you applying medicine or touching me? Cecile Ruan. She suddenly poked him in the face a little harder. What do you say? Louis Fu hissed and gritted his teeth to look at Cecile Ruan. Are you still a woman? If I were a man, if I slapped down, you might die. Louis Fu suddenly smiled, approached her, and said in a deep voice, If you were a man, I would indulge you so much. At this moment, the two were extremely close, and they could clearly hear each other's breathing sounds, and they could also see themselves reflected in each other's pupils. Cecile Ruan thought about his indulgence, pronounced by his hoarse voice, crushed in his ears, and lingered for a long time. Cecile Ruan felt that he was not expressing how gentleman he was, but to her, just to her, stating the facts between the two. She couldn't argue with that because it was true, but she didn't know how to answer it. Fortunately, her stomach rescued her. Make two cooing sounds in time. Early the next morning, Cecile Ruan got up early, and when she returned home, she met a few colleagues at the door. They were chatting casually, and today's monthly meeting of the flight planning department was postponed. The specific reason is unknown, but it seems to be Louis Fu's arrangement. When Cecile Ruan heard it, he subconsciously looked at his palm. It's really not a broken palm. Another day later, Cecile Ruan heard again that the regular meeting of the ministry had also been cancelled this month. She was stunned. No way, Louis Fu's face is so delicate, is it good? It wasn't until the morning of the third day, when the pre-flight collaboration meeting came out, that he caught a glimpse of Louis Fu's back from a distance, and he breathed a sigh of relief. All in Xinjiang Literature City, it seems to be already good. She took Captain Fan again on this flight, and after the meeting, she went to the cafeteria with the flight crew for breakfast. At the table, after a few small talks, Cecile Ruan mentioned that he had a flight with an instructor next week. After becoming a co-pilot, in order to accumulate flight experience, the company will arrange flight instructors for them to fly according to the flight situation. At that time, Cecile Ruan will be able to fly in the driver's seat, next to the flight instructor, supervising and guaranteeing the flight. Before this, Cecile Ruan had also lined up instructors to take flights, so this time he was not too excited, just mentioned it casually. Captain Fan also casually asked where to fly. Lincheng. Cecile Ruan said, I'm still familiar with this route. Familiar is familiar, but it is still different to have teachers on the side. Although Captain Fan has been a captain for 20 years, he will occasionally be nervous when he encounters random inspections by instructors, or when instructors temporarily add a crew to his flight for convenience. Then have you seen which instructor it is this time? I'll see if I recognize you, and if I do, I'll let him take care of you more. Cecile Ruan recalled and said, I don't remember the name clearly, it seems that the surname is he. Captain Fan thought with his mouth open, Heelan Fong. That's the name. Him. Captain Fan was surprised and put down his chopsticks directly. Are you sure it's him? Yes, what's wrong? Then you're too lucky. Captain Fan said, this instructor is not ordinary, the Air Force is born, excellent achievements, retired to the World Airlines. At that time the World Airlines just established a fleet, he was quite bullish, was the first chief captain, the technology that few people can match. I remember one year, because of the tower command error, his aircraft and another Airbus 320 Air close to the air, almost collided, even the air traffic control was frightened, was really fainted. As a result, he turned the situation around, avoided an air crash, and was commended by the Aviation Bureau at that time. As Captain Fan spoke, everyone at the table pricked up their ears to listen. And this old-timer is powerful, people do everything as the best, and then he changed the teacher, and the teaching results are also superb. Captain Fan said and sighed, but his daughter fell ill later, and he wanted to spend more time at home with his daughter, so it was difficult to fly with him. And at that time, if anyone lined up to fly with him, he had to show off, and 4 or 5 years ago, I seem to have heard that he was hired to be a flight student abroad to be an instructor. I thought he would not appear. Why did he suddenly come back to fly with him? Originally, Cecile Ruan was excited, but when Captain Fan said this, she became excited again, not caring about his doubts at all. Was it the air proximity in '07? I read the news, it turned out to be him. Captain Fan saw that Cecile Ruan's eyes were full of expectation, and said in a deep voice, but he is also notoriously stern, once took the flight co-pilot, did not fly well, he directly sent people to the 5 sides of the flying field. The 5 sides of this field are also a way to take flights, but instead of performing flights, they practice takeoff and landing in empty planes at the airport. No co-pilot wants to go this way, because it means you can't do it. A new flight attendant next to him sighed twice. The instructor still has so much power. Not to mention whether the instructors have so much power. Captain Fan laughed, lowered his voice, and said, do you know who the people are? Mr. Fu's uncle, Fu Dong's brother-in-law, wanting to drop the captain's hair back to the co-pilot is just a matter of words. After that, he turned to look at Cecile Ruan again, so you're lucky, but you must also pay attention, he is very strict, if you make a low-level mistake, be careful you can only fly to the 5 sides. Cecile Ruan nodded repeatedly, I will definitely behave well. Because of this incident, Cecile Ruan was in a good mood all day, and when he returned home in the afternoon, he pulled the flight box leisurely home, and hummed a song while waiting for the elevator. I want to fly higher, dance like a fierce wind, break free, I want to fly higher. But the moment the elevator doors opened, Cecile Ruan's ethereal singing came to an abrupt end. Louis Fu stood inside, carrying a bag of medicine in his hand and wearing a mask, looking at her lazily. Does the air traffic control allow you to fly higher? Cecile Ruan. She walked in silently and stood side by side with Louis Fu, and the two did not communicate much. The elevator slowly went up. Cecile Ruan glanced at Louis Fu's mask, looked at the medicine in his hand, and asked, cold? Louis Fu looked down at her and did not speak, but took off his mask. Do you think it's exciting for me to go to a meeting like this and meet my subordinates and my employees? Cecile Ruan. No, 3 days have passed, and Louis Fu still has faint marks on his face. Her 50 kilograms arm push is really not in vain, and pull-ups are really not done in vain. Cecile Ruan looked at his face, pondered for a moment, and asked in a low voice, does it hurt? Louis Fu said with a smile, it hurts so much that I can't forget you in my life. Gate 36.
Welcome to Storyverse. If you have any novels you'd like to see or stories you'd like to share, feel free to leave us a comment or send us a private message. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button to join our community of avid readers and romance enthusiasts.
Landing on my heart, chapter 36. You see this man, he says, we're clear, but his actions show that he's still very vindictive. Cecile Ruan felt that Louis Fu still couldn't talk more than 3 words either before or now. So for the sake of the physical and mental health of both parties, she chose to remain silent, otherwise she could not be sure that she would not spit out fragrance for a while. But when she got on the elevator, she glanced at the medicine bag in Louis Fu's hand, which was translucent, and she could see how many boxes of medicine were inside. So let's say you are a straight man, what is the use of taking medicine with marks on the face, or the most effective external supplies? Are you useless with what I gave you? Cecile Ruan said, why don't you believe me so much? Medicine is certainly not useful. Louis Fu glanced at her, looked like he didn't want to speak, and spit out 3 words in a long time. Gastrointestinal medicine. Oh, no wonder he felt that he was not in good spirits today. It turned out that he was not slapped by her, but had a gastrointestinal problem. Back home, Cecile Ruan flipped through the delivery app, looked around, and found that the nearby shops were tired of eating, and had no appetite, so she planned to cook by herself. There were no dishes in the refrigerator, but there were many frozen dumplings for her by Xiaozhen, and Cecile Ruan took a pack out, boiled a pot of water, and put down 10 dumplings. But just as she was about to put the dumplings back in the refrigerator, she suddenly remembered the medicine Louis Fu was holding today. Gastrointestinal problems, which are estimated to be caused by irregular eating. When she thought about it, she was already thinking about cooking another bowl of dumplings. But when he saw the dumplings in the boiling water floating and floating, Cecile Ruan suddenly woke up. He hasn't eaten yet, how can he be full and have nothing to do? Why worry about whether he eats or not? He only needs a phone call if he wants to eat, and more people run errands for him. In the end, she also cooked only 1 bowl of dumplings. 15 minutes later, the piping hot dumplings are out of the pan. She was so hungry that she brought the bowl to the table, only to find that the vinegar was gone. Absolutely, it was only then that she remembered that she had cleaned the sewer with the remaining half bottle of vinegar last week. At present, there are only 3 ways. One is to go downstairs to buy it yourself, but to find errands, and the third is to go upstairs to borrow a bottle of vinegar. The dumplings are already out of the pan and steaming. Cecile Ruan weighed 3 methods, and it seemed that only the last one would be eaten before the dumplings were cold. Well, she nodded to herself and sent a message to Louis Fu. Cecile Ruan, do you have vinegar at home? It came back very quickly. Louis was, Cecile Ruan, the vinegar is gone, borrow some. Louis Fu, get it yourself. Cecile Ruan was ready to go out, but as she changed her shoes, she moved and asked another question. Cecile Ruan, did you eat? Louis Fu, not yet. Okay, still thinking that the slap was too powerful, Cecile Ruan decided to give the bowl of dumplings to Louis Fu first. However, when she stood in front of Louis Fu's house with steaming dumplings this night, she found Louis Fu's driver also carrying a food box. The two looked at each other, and Cecile Ruan suddenly understood something. At the same time, the door clicked open. The driver took a step ahead of Cecile Ruan and handed over the food box. Mr. Fu, your dinner. Louis Fu took the food box and looked at Cecile Ruan next to him. His gaze waved on the dumplings in her hand, and she spoke, isn't it borrowing vinegar? Well, yes. Cecile Ruan's eyes were calm. I'll bring it up and pour a little and go. Louis Fu said nothing and let her in the door, while the driver left on his own. The vinegar is in the kitchen, you go find it yourself. Oh, Cecile Ruan walked into Louis Fu's kitchen with a bowl and looked around. Okay, the same apartment, the same building, this apartment type is really very different. She hadn't paid attention to it the last time she came. It turned out that the number 1 on each floor was so big, even the kitchen was larger than her living room. Hengshi Mining Co. Ltd., stone-hammered. However, Louis Fu's kitchen is big and complete, but it is completely new, even the condiments are unopened. When Cecile Ruan found vinegar, he also took a point of looking at the expiration date. Fortunately, it has not expired. At this time, Louis Fu went into the kitchen to get a pair of chopsticks, and when he passed by Cecile Ruan, he said, take it, I don't usually use it. No need, Cecile Ruan said, I'll just pour a little. After that, she removed the plastic seal outside, pinched the bottle cap and twisted it casually. Hey, all in Xinjiang Literature City, so tight. She added a little more effort, but still didn't unscrew it. A bottle of vinegar, old lady, still can't solve it. Cecile Ruan twisted her neck, clenched the bottle, and squeezed her hand just as the cap was about to open, but she saw Louis Fu look at her a little strangely. Cecile Ruan felt like he had "Is this still a woman?" all over his face. Thinking of his slap and 5 fingers, the shadow still lingered on his face. Cecile Ruan's hand unconsciously loosened, and his mind pondered how to naturally and unpretentiously put on an expression that he couldn't unscrew. Can't unscrew. Without waiting for her to perform, Louis Fu could see it. Cecile Ruan nodded. Well, it's too tight for this. Louis Fu tilted his head and looked down at her. Then you punch it open. Cecile Ruan, you really don't see me as a woman. She inhaled and told herself that this person had apologized, and you had slapped him too, so stop scolding him. Mr. Fu, I'm a woman. Louis Fu snorted. Then you smash it with your little pink fist. Endure fart. My little powder fist smashed your head. Cecile Ruan kicked him in the calf, but unfortunately the dog man seemed to know that she would use the trick of moving the tiger away from the mountain, and said that he wanted to hit someone, but it was his leg that moved. He dodged sensitively sideways, while also taking the vinegar bottle in her hand. He twisted lightly, and the cap opened. Cecile Ruan was silent. He handed the bottle over, lifted the curtain, raised his eyebrows slightly, and Cecile Ruan felt as if he was going to debunk something he pretended not to be able to unscrew. Cecile Ruan looked up at him, waiting for him to speak. Don't you vomit when you drink vinegar? Want to lose weight today? At this moment, Cecile Ruan realized that she always wanted to hit this man, but not because of the incident a few years ago. It's because the man is just very simple, pure begging. He appeared in her dreams tonight. She dreamed that she came to a seaside. The sky is blue, the sun is shining, the water is clear and the sea breeze is gentle. She saw Louis Fu there too. She rushed forward and kicked him. Lean, the foot hurts, this King 8 shell is really hard. The next morning, Cecile Ruan woke up an hour earlier than usual. Hearing about the deeds of He Lanfeng, the instructor who took the flight this time, she went downstairs for a morning jog, hoping to meet the instructor with the best mental outlook. Only one point, I heard that he is Louis Fu's uncle, and I hope that Louis Fu is not a family hereditary character. Unfortunately, the sky was not as expected. Cecile Ruan had not yet arrived at the dispatch department. She met a few pilots on the road, and someone heard that it was He Lanfeng who took her today, so someone chatted with him. They say this man is harsh, not simply harsh, he is very good at soul-torturing the co-pilot from multiple angles. For example, once with a flight, the co-pilot looked at the wrong altimeter, and when he reached the altitude of the airspace and was still desperately climbing, He Lanfeng suddenly asked the co-pilot, "Young man, did you bring an oxygen cylinder?" Co-pilot, No, what's wrong? You dare to fly into outer space without an oxygen cylinder." While listening to this story, Cecile Ruan also saw the figure of Louis Fu in the glass corridor in the distance. Well, it seems to be the family genetic personality. Cecile Ruan cheered himself up, went to the flight mission, took the day's aviation weather report, went to the aviation doctor and air traffic control office to sign and stamp, and went to the conference room. She was the first to arrive, and the conference room was still quiet, and she looked at the chart without distraction, and did not look up until the crew came. Before he could say hello, another person came in. Everyone turned their heads to look over, and the person who came was wearing a uniform, tall, dignified, and handsome, and at a glance, he was related to Louis Fu. However, even the wrinkles on his face were written with the word serious. The conference room was full of girls, and the atmosphere became solemn in an instant. And He Lanfeng walked into the conference room, saw Cecile Ruan, and saw her uniform, and was a little surprised at that moment. But after a few seconds, he seemed to think of something, and actually lowered his head and smiled. A room full of people were a little confused. Isn't it rumored that this instructor is particularly harsh? Is it particularly difficult? Why did you laugh before you spoke? Everyone did not understand and did not dare to ask. He Lanfeng also found that he seemed to be a little gaff, and coughed with his fist against his mouth. Well, let's start. After the whole collaboration meeting, Cecile Ruan began to suspect the rumors he had heard. Isn't this instructor quite kind and easy to talk to? The collaboration meeting did not interrupt her throughout the process, and praised her for reading the chart seriously. Let's go. He Lanfeng took the water cup to drink, and a person suddenly came over outside the door, knocked on the door, and stood there and said, "There is a change in the crew list today." Everyone looked over, and the man said, "Today Fu is going to Xicheng to participate in the meeting, but there is fog over there, and the flight can't fly, so he flew to the city first. Your flight time is right." He and secretary add a crew to lock the seat. He Lanfeng choked on a mouthful of water, bent over and coughed violently. Cecile Ruan leaned over to help him pat his back. "Are you okay?" He Lanfeng shook his head and said, "It's okay, I'm a little surprised." Cecile Ruan didn't know what was surprising about this. There were frequent flight crew travels, and adding crews was a common thing. But Cecile Ruan remembered that when he just looked at the passenger list, there was only one empty seat in the cabin on this flight, and Louis Fu and Bai Yan were crowded. The man at the door saw Cecile Ruan's doubts and said, "Mr. Fu plus the cockpit." Cecile Ruan. Okay, it's easy for him to get special approval from the certificate holder to enter the cockpit, because he is the certificate holder himself. But when Louis Fu sat in the back of the cockpit, Cecile Ruan still found the atmosphere strange. She also did not expect to encounter Louis Fu sitting in the cockpit one day. When she brought the headset, she glanced back, and the palm prints on his face had completely disappeared. Louis Fu's face was calm, and there was no change in expression when he caught Cecile Ruan's eyes. On the other side, Helan Feng always looked back at Louis Fu and smiled. "Why did you run the cockpit?" Louis Fu said calmly, "Xiqing is foggy, the flight can't fly." He didn't explain much. The fact is that he can fly normally, who is willing to save the country with a curve, and he can't care how much his uncle thinks. Helan Feng did deliberately joke about Louis Fu. He had not yet started to fly after participating in the model modification training, but Louis Fu took the initiative to mention it to him, saying that he would arrange a shift for him. Usually where this kind of thing can be used by Louis Fu personally, Helan Feng thought that the co-pilot this time was probably a pilot he admired. However, the moment he met Cecile Ruan as a man, he understood. All in Xinjiang Literature City, Louis Fu was quiet in the cockpit and didn't say a word because he closed his eyes and slept as soon as he came up. At this time, Cecile Ruan checked the preparation list and did not speak. Originally, when she found that Helan Feng was actually very easy to get along with, her tension had been completely dispelled, but since Louis Fu came in, she found that she seemed to be less comfortable again. Well, he is the boss, who is not nervous when the boss looks at the work. Seeing Cecile Ruan's brows frowning tightly, Helan Feng smiled and asked, "Are you particularly afraid of me?" Cecile Ruan looked up and said, "No." "Then I see you're quite nervous. The instructor is there, even the captain will be nervous. I think they said bad things about me, but don't worry, I'm very kind to female Faye." He smiled, not to mention that it was still a different female flyer. Cecile Ruan nodded, "Well, thank you." After saying this, Helan Feng looked back at Louis Fu. "Very good, still sleeping, seems to be completely unconcerned." During the preparation, Helan Feng hardly spoke, and all the operations were left to Cecile Ruan. It was not until the plane was launched that he said seriously, "In the takeoff run, due to the influence of the wind, it is also necessary to resist the rudder downwind, but do not easily press the rod. Just at the moment of leaving the land, when the wind is strong, there is a slight awareness of the upwind surface pressure rod, and more, but the spoiler will be raised, affecting the performance and control of the aircraft." Cecile Ruan nodded, "Remember. After leaving land, the aircraft will automatically form a deflection angle. Pay attention to slope correction." "Good. At that time, pay attention to shift your gaze from the outside to the cockpit, do not have a slope on the lateral side of the eye, and do not enter the instrument with a slope." "Okay, understood." "Okay, I'll just say this, next you operate, I look, ask me questions." Cecile Ruan took the headset and contacted the tower, and soon the plane entered the runway and began to run, and Helan Feng also paid attention to Cecile Ruan's movements. The moment the push hit him, Louis Fu slowly opened his eyes and his gaze fell on Cecile Ruan. He could see Cecile Ruan's side face and her eyes behind her sunglasses. She looked intently at the dashboard, communicating with the tower, her expression serious, and there was no trace of makeup on her face. All in Xinjiang Literature City, but at this time, she has a unique charm that Louis Fu has never seen in others. The plane was running at high speed, and looking at the person in front of him who was controlling the plane, Louis Fu felt that his chest cavity was slowly swelling. The moment he left the land, the corners of Cecile Ruan's lips curved slightly. Louis Fu's eyes remained unmoved for a long time, and his heartbeat missed a beat at that moment. He took a deep breath, but it seemed that it was difficult to exhale smoothly. Half an hour later, the plane went into cruising mode. Helan Feng unfastened his shoulder seat belt, stretched his muscles, and said, "Not bad, you took off perfectly this time." Hearing the instructor's compliment, Cecile Ruan couldn't hide her smile. Helan Feng couldn't resist looking back at Louis Fu. "Why do you keep sleeping? Don't give your employees a word of review." Louis Fu opened his eyes and swept over Helan Feng faintly, "With you, where do I have the qualifications to evaluate?" Helan Feng snorted softly and suddenly said to Cecile Ruan, "Do you have a boyfriend?" Hearing this question, Louis Fu's eyelids jumped and his brows furrowed, but it was a pity that the person in front of him would not notice his face at all. Cecile Ruan was stunned for a moment. I'll just ask. He Lanfeng said, we like to talk about this at our age. Oh, why didn't those colleagues tell her that this instructor liked to gossip when he was flying flat? Nope, then you have to hurry. He Lanfeng said, the best time to solve personal problems is the co-pilot period, and it is too busy to become a captain in the future, so it is not convenient. Oh, remembered. I'll help you find it when I turn back. Oh, thank you. Thank you for what, little thing? He Lanfeng tapped his fingers lightly on his knees, glanced out the window a few times, and glanced at Louis Fu again. How do you see my nephew? Just this one sitting in the back, handsome, still young and promising, single. Oh, how about you consider him your boyfriend? Almost without thinking, Cecile Ruan said, I don't think so. There was a sudden silence in the cockpit, and it fell into an eerie embarrassment. He Lanfeng touched his nose and turned his head sarcastically, ready to change the topic to ease the embarrassment. At this moment, the man behind him snorted softly, have I ever been your boyfriend? How do you conclude that I'm not good at being your boyfriend? Cecile Ruan felt funny and said directly, I have to go in and freeze it for 2 days when I evaluate the refrigeration effect of a refrigerator. Yes, Gate 37. Landing on my heart. Chapter 37. When the affirmative yes fell, clearly reaching Cecile Ruan's ears, she sensed how wrong she had just had with Louis Fu. Even He Lanfeng squinted at the two of them. Even if it is the first time a man and a woman meet, it will become awkward to be forced, not to mention that Cecile Ruan and Louis Fu look down all day long and don't look up, and the atmosphere becomes inexplicably subtle when the topic is pulled in this aspect. Moreover, this is not the first time this kind of conversation has appeared. Cecile Ruan remembers that she also asked Louis Fu, do you want to be my boyfriend? But Louis Fu didn't answer at the time, and she asked the question for a moment and didn't take it seriously. And now, Louis Fu seems to be saying you can be my girlfriend and try to see how I am. When trying to understand this layer, Cecile Ruan naturally closed her mouth. But when consciousness drifts in that direction, it becomes a little uncontrollable, and some illogical thoughts pop up in my head. She found that when that slap passed, her bad mood towards Louis Fu seemed to be cleared. It's not that annoying, and it's even quite good a lot of the time, especially his temper, which seems to be very good. In addition to his unlimited tolerance of her vexatious teasing, many times, what he does seems to have long exceeded the boundaries of ordinary men and women to get along. For example, if you have to go to her house for dinner, like accompany her to the police station, like go to the bar to find her because of a message from her that night. Cecile Ruan even thought back to the little thing in the elevator where he stood in front of her to block the dog. She looked at Louis Fu without an emotional filter at this time, only to react that something was wrong for a long time. Thinking about it, Cecile Ruan glanced at the main dashboard, and the cold data on it pulled back her mind in time. She frowned and said with an indifferent expression, the instructor is still here, don't talk nonsense, otherwise even if you are the boss, we can order you to leave the cockpit. Louis Fu smiled with his tongue against his cheek and turned his head to look out the window. He Lanfeng pouted and shook his eyebrows, and stopped talking. For a moment, the cockpit went quiet. The cockpit door buckled twice, and the purser called PA in. He Lanfeng cleared his throat, took the PA, and said, let's drink something. The cockpit door opened, the purser came in, and asked, President Fu, Instructor Helan, Deputy Ruan, do you want something to drink? Cecile Ruan and Louis Fu said in unison, coffee is not sugar. The air froze for a moment, and He Lanfeng smiled. I see that you two have quite a tacit understanding. After getting off the plane, Bai Yang had arranged for the driver and went directly to Xiqing with Louis Fu. The fog in the early morning had not dissipated by noon, the traffic on the highway had stalled, and Bai Yan glanced at his watch from time to time. During this time, Louis Fu stayed up late for a long time because of the flight quality monitoring reform, irregular diet, gastrointestinal problems, and the doctor advised him to eat on time. But looking at the current situation, he couldn't catch a lunch before the meeting. All in Xinjiang Literature City today is the International Import Expo. The world's major manufacturers come to bid, covering aircraft engines, aviation equipment, special vehicles, cabin equipment, in-flight entertainment programs, etc. Is one of the important projects of the World Bank this year, and it is expected to be a whole afternoon. As Bai Yan expected, 2 hours later, they arrived at the conference center. The attendees and representatives of the manufacturers were already in place, and the scene was overcrowded but also quiet and orderly. The staff led Louis Fu to the VIP seats in the first row, with Louis Fu's nameplate on the table, and after he took his seat, the surrounding participants came up one after another to greet him. One hand reached out, accompanied by the other party's self-introduction, one after another without stopping. It wasn't until the host on the stage started debugging the microphone that the last person to talk left. Louis Fu sat down and straightened his cuffs, and another hand reached out in front of him. When I looked up, my gaze immediately drifted away. "Why are you here? What's the reason for me here?" Yenin sat down next to Louis Fu and turned the nameplate on the table to Louis Fu. "Of course, I am here on behalf of our Hengshi Airlines." Yan's appearance in Louis Fu was unexpected, but also reasonable. In the past, at such an expo, the banquet family would not let Yan attend as a representative. Usually Yan Dong personally went out or his special assistant came on the stage, but this year, Yan Dong's body is not optimistic. Yan is idle, so it is unreasonable. Louis Fu had no intention of making small talk with Yan, and a glance was enough. All in Xinjiang Literature City, and Yan was also interested, looked at the content on the LED screen twice. Not very interested. It was better to chat with Louis Fu. "I heard you've been reforming flight quality control recently." Although the two usually don't deal with each other very well, in terms of work, the two have a deep relationship, and he and Yan have always lived in peace. Since the flight of vice pilot you was transferred to Fudu some time ago, Louis Fu began to do something. He proposed a comprehensive reform of flight quality control, starting with World Airlines, overturning the guidelines that have been used for more than 20 years. Which is not a secret in airlines, and it has also stirred up thousands of waves. But Yan was not surprised. Someone would do this sooner or later, but he didn't expect it to be Louis Fu, who was about his age. "Why did you suddenly remember to do this?" Louis Fu's face was calm, as if he was just talking about a trivial matter. "I have wanted to do it since I took office, and the incident of an emergency cholecystitis of a co-pilot some time ago was an opportunity." Louis Fu said it lightly, but Yan didn't understand how difficult it was. The early flight quality monitoring introduced by QAR did indeed play a positive role in the operation of pilot specifications, and gave startup airlines a model for management. But in recent years, the consequences of QAR abuse have become more and more obvious, and these effects have far outweighed its positive significance. For example, frequent tail wipe incidents, and incidents where a plane landed last year with only about 20 minutes of fuel left, almost all point to the management and punishment of QAR that has put the cart before the horse. The reason for this is that the pilot fears QAR penalties, thus worsening a simple incident into a serious incident. In the view of many, QAR should be used for technical analysis and training, not for safety inspectors to punish pilots. But it is difficult for anyone to actually take this step, because of its deep-rooted use of history and authority, and if you want reform, you need to come up with a more convincing trial plan. Yan shook his head with a pessimistic attitude. "Why bother? Thankless effort. You can't play with that group of old antiques who are resting on their laurels." Louis Fu stared at the LED screen, his eyes clear, but there was a complete toughness in his tone. "Don't say it too early." At the same time as he finished speaking, the meeting officially began at this time. By the end of the nearly 6-hour meeting, he was at the limit of his patience, his neck twisted, his eyelids sinking up and down, and when he turned his head, Louis Fu had never been tired. The people on the stage had already begun to say the closing speech. Yan Bai Lai took out his mobile phone and flipped through it, opened Weibo, and saw that the World Aviation official Bo updated a news a minute ago. He pretended to be an office worker, clicked in to see that it was the promotional Weibo of the opening of the national tour enrollment of the World Aviation Academy this year, and attached 9 pictures. The middle one, he could tell at a glance, was Cecile Ruan. After opening the big picture and looking at it for a long time, he didn't hold back, took the mobile phone and asked the person next to him, "Is there any original picture of this promotional photo of your company?" Louis Fu looked Yan up and down inch by inch, and then said indifferently, "No." Yan had long been accustomed to Louis Fu's attitude, and did not say anything, and continued to play with his mobile phone. But a few seconds later, he recalled that the tone of the sentence just now was wrong. He seemed to sense something, put down his phone, and knocked on the table. "Louis Fu," he raised his eyebrows and said word by word, "I've wanted to say for a long time, do you like Cecile Ruan?" "Yes," the expected affirmative answer, did not even hesitate. Yenin smiled angrily, opened his mouth for a long time, and didn't know what to say. Louis Fu, you really. Yenin really didn't know what to say, calmed down for a while, recalled the previous incident, and suddenly smiled again. What about Cecile Ruan's attitude towards Louis Fu? He is still gentle and polite with himself, and he is simply a fool of Louis Fu. Louis Fu, Cecile Ruan, don't you know what attitude Cecile Ruan has towards you? What are you doing here? What attitude? Just like that slap, after the slap print on the face disappeared, and the grudge between the two was completely written off. But every time I think of her, sometimes my heart, and sometimes it itches. Instead of not going up and down like this, it is better to hold it firmly, and then you will know whether she will become a needle into it, or turn into a soft place to lie in the bottom of her heart. Louis Fu raised his eyebrows and squinted at Yenin. Same tone, same sentence. Don't talk too early. All cut. At this moment, Cecile Ruan of the staff cafeteria suddenly sneezed. The cafeteria aunt asked, the girl has a cold. Nope, Cecile Ruan wiped his nose, maybe someone is scolding me behind my back. She finished her meal and looked for a place on her plate. In the evening, there were more people in the staff cafeteria than usual, and in addition to the air attendants, many civilian staff also came to eat, and there were not many empty seats at this time. I found the only table left to sit down, but the spoon accidentally fell to the floor. Cecile Ruan bent down to pick it up, and just reached out, but the spoon was picked up by the other hand. He looked up and saw Yuchen standing in front of her with a smile. Xiao Ruan, it's a coincidence. Since Cecile Ruan last met him in London and had a meal together, the two have not been in private contact. After returning, the two are not the same model, and there is no chance of cooperation. And he is now with Jiang Ziyue. Cecile Ruan is more deliberately avoidant, occasionally meeting in the company, except for the necessary greeting, not saying a word. After all, Jiang Ziyue knew that Yu Chen had chased her before, and less contact would be less about melon fields and Li Xia. But reaching out not to hit the smiling person, at this time, Cecile Ruan can only smile politely. Ciao. Yu Chen's spoon was put aside and asked, is this no one? Cecile Ruan shook her head, your flight tonight. Yes. Yu Chen sat down, his gaze casually glanced around Cecile Ruan's face, and asked, where did you fly today? Cecile Ruan put it succinctly, near the city. Oh, my hometown. The two chatted like this, a little embarrassed, but they were perfectly covered up by each other. By the way, I'm married at the end of the year, I'll send you an invitation later. Yu Chen said for a long time, this is his focus. Congratulations. Cecile Ruan picked up the chili peppers on her plate and said in a relaxed tone, what month? December 7th or 8th, I can't remember. Yu Chen laughed as he said, I have it when I turn back, otherwise I will be scolded every time I ask and go home. Cecile Ruan also laughed, but she was laughing. Sure enough, there are still prodigal sons in this world who look back and say, how did she not expect that Yu Chen was so careful? A man was actually accepted by Jiang Ziyue. The two laughed separately, not on the same channel, until a co-pilot passed by with a plate and coughed lightly. Yu Chen raised his head and looked at the co-pilot in confusion. He squeezed his eyes and pouted to the right. Yu Chen had a sense of foreboding in his heart, looked over there, and sure enough saw Jiang Ziyue standing at the door with a black face. Yu Chen silently cursed bad luck in his heart, said goodbye to Cecile Ruan, and left with the plate. At the door, Jiang Ziyue wore a uniform and waited for Yu Chen to come towards her. She had been standing here for nearly 15 minutes, and Yu Chen hadn't even noticed her, his gaze completely glued to Cecile Ruan. The two didn't know what they were talking about, and they laughed happily. When she ate with Yu Chen, why didn't she see him laughing, and she knew to lower her head and play games. Finished eating. Jiang Ziyue looked at Yu Chen in front of him coldly, why don't you eat more? What are you talking about all day? Yu Chen usually annoyed Jiang Ziyue's tone the most, just because he used to have many girlfriends, and now when he saw him talking to a woman, he had to ask for a long time, aren't you going to fly in a while? Hurry up and eat. What do I eat? Eat, she just eats full, I don't have to eat. Yu Chen looked at her impatiently, what are you inexplicably angry about? I just can't say 2 words to my female colleague now. It also depends on what kind of female colleague she is, can she be the same as others? Okay, whatever you think. Whatever I think. What do you make me think? Hiding in the corner to eat with people, who is afraid of seeing it? I'm afraid who's going to eat with her in the cafeteria? We don't know to go out to eat. You're sick all day, you. Yu Chen's tone was heavy, his steps were heavier, and he pulled out his legs and left. Jiang Ziyue caught up and tugged at his sleeve. What do you mean? Isn't it impatient for a long time and the heart is itching? Still like her, huh? I know that what you men can't get is the best, Yu Chen. Don't forget that you are the one who is going to get married. Neurosis, you. Yu Chen didn't even bother to speak, so he pulled out his legs and left. And Jiang Ziyue had a flight for a while, and he couldn't catch up and make a result, and turned his head to look at Cecile Ruan, who was still slowly pouring the dinner plate. In fact, the day she returned from Cecile Ruan, she didn't get a good night's sleep. One is that Cecile Ruan knows the news she spread and finds an opportunity to take revenge on her. The second is because of Yu Chen. Back then, Yu Chen's inability to ask for Cecile Ruan has always been a thorn in her heart. She knows Yu Chen too well. There are a lot of flowers and intestines, as long as she doesn't look at him. She can't control her flirtatious mouth, not to mention the people he didn't chase, looking up all day long and not looking down. So recently she checked the post whenever she was free, and often found that Yu Chen quarreled with her and she didn't stop. But how can this be prevented? When she had just seen Yu Chen and Cecile Ruan talking and laughing, all the sense of crisis accumulated in the past few months had exploded at this moment. When Cecile Ruan came out after pouring the plate, he greeted her with a smile. Did you come to Captain Yu? He just left. Jiang Ziyue said with a cold face, I know. Seeing her strange expression, Cecile Ruan didn't bother to say anything more and left directly. But before she took a few steps, the people behind her stopped her. How? Cecile Ruan looked back. Anything else? Jiang Ziyue took a deep breath and tried to make his face and tone calm enough. Xiao Ruan, we both know that Yu Chen has chased you before. All in Xinjiang Literature City. Cecile Ruan didn't go away either, slowly turning around and waiting for her follow-up. But we're getting married, so, she looked up at Cecile Ruan, I hope you'll keep your distance from him. Cecile Ruan tried to endure it, but couldn't hold back her laughter. Sister, don't worry, I couldn't look at your baby bumps before, and now I can't look at them, so you can cover them well. Such humiliating language matched with that smile. Jiang Ziyue smiled angrily, and nodded coldly. Yes, where is the ordinary captain worthy of you? You have high vision. What kind of passenger seat do you sit in? Directly in the passenger seat of President Fu's car. Cecile Ruan tugged at the corners of her mouth. Embarrassed. I really sat down.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, remember to subscribe to our channel for more captivating illustrated romance audiobooks. Don't miss out on our latest releases and be part of our growing community. Hit that subscribe button and embark on an enchanting journey with us.